The clock struck 8 as I, Eleanor, sat at the dining table, sipping my tea in silence. At 55, I prided myself on maintaining a sense of style and grace. My job as a senior editor at a lifestyle magazine wasn't just a career, it was my passion, a part of who I was. Richard, my husband of nearly 30 years, sat across from me, his eyes glued to his phone. The silence between us wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, loaded with years of unspoken resentments and faded love. "I wish you'd just die already," Richard muttered, not looking up from his screen. His words sliced through the quiet room like a sharp knife. I felt a chill run down my spine, not from fear, but from the sheer coldness of his statement. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Richard finally looked up, his expression one of annoyance rather than regret. "You heard me. It's not like you're doing anything valuable, just taking up space." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the man I had married, the man who had once promised to cherish me. Now he wished me dead. Our marriage had become a shadow of what it once was. Richard's outdated beliefs, his insistence that a woman's place was in the home, clashed fiercely with my independence and career ambitions. It wasn't just about us anymore. His mother, Claire, a widowed woman of considerable wealth, had become a point of contention. Richard often spoke of her fortune, eyeing it like a vulture. "You're unbelievable," I said, my voice tinged with disgust. "Is this really what our marriage has come to? You wishing me dead?" Richard scoffed. "Marriage? This is a contract of convenience, nothing more. And let's not pretend you're not waiting for Claire to kick the bucket for her money." His accusation was like a slap in the face. Unlike him, I had never seen Claire as a walking bank account. She was a kind, intelligent woman who deserved better than a son waiting for her demise. "You're a monster," I said quietly, standing up from the table. "I don't even know who you are anymore." Richard's laugh was cruel and hollow. "Oh, Eleanor, you never knew me. You were too busy with your precious career." I walked away from the table, from Richard, feeling a mixture of anger, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of loss. Not for what we had, but for what we could have had, if only Richard had been the man I thought he was. That night, as I lay in bed, the weight of Richard's words pressed down on me. This wasn't just a loveless marriage. It was a battlefield, and I was tired of being the only one fighting for peace. It was time to make a decision, one that would change the course of my life. The first rays of dawn brought a new resolve. I would no longer be a passive participant in this farce of a marriage. Richard had shown his true colors, and it was time for me to show mine. The following weeks were a blur of silent meals and cold stares. Richard's cruelty had unveiled a truth I had long tried to ignore. Our marriage was nothing but a hollow shell. Each evening, Richard would retreat into his world, often whispering into his phone or laughing at texts. The secrecy of his actions raised a red flag in my mind. Was he having an affair? Strangely, the thought didn't hurt as much as I expected. Perhaps it was because my own feelings for him had withered into nothingness. One night, as I lay awake, I heard Richard's muffled voice from the living room. Curiosity overtook me, and I tiptoed to the door, pressing my ear against it. "That old witch, she's just hoarding her wealth," he sneered. "Once she's gone, we'll be set for life." His words were like poison, seeping into my heart. He wasn't just betraying me. He was betraying his own mother. Claire, who had always been kind to us, didn't deserve such a fate. My heart ached for Claire. She was a strong woman, but the thought of her own son wishing her dead was too much to bear. I decided then that I needed to protect her, not just from Richard, but also from the cruel grip of greed. The next day I visited Claire. Her home was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the coldness of my own. We sipped tea, and I watched her, the lines on her face telling stories of a life well lived. "Claire, you know you can always count on me, right?" I said, reaching across the table to hold her hand. "If you ever need anything, I'm here." Claire smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I know, Eleanor, you've always been more of a daughter to me than a daughter-in-law." Her words warmed my heart, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that lingered. I knew I had to act, to somehow shield her from the greed and malice that had consumed Richard. That evening, as I lay in bed, I realized the extent of my isolation. My marriage was a facade, and the man I shared my home with was a stranger driven by selfishness. But amidst the darkness, a plan began to form in my mind, a plan to expose Richard's true intentions and protect Claire from his clutches. I would need to be careful, cunning even. It was time for the hunted to become the hunter. With each passing day, my resolve strengthened. Richard had underestimated me, and that was his biggest mistake. The stage was set for a reckoning, and I was ready to play my part. The days turned into weeks, each one passing with the heavy knowledge of Richard's betrayal. It was during one of these monotonous days that fate took a sharp, unexpected turn. I had just returned from work when I received a phone call that would change everything. The voice on the other end was Dr. Harper, Richard's physician. "Mrs. Williams, it's about your husband," Dr. Harper said, his tone grave. "We've found something concerning in his latest tests. It's serious, and we need to discuss it with you." A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. What could be so serious that the doctor needed to talk to me first? I met with Dr. Harper the next day. The hospital's sterile walls and the antiseptic smell did nothing to calm my nerves. Dr. Harper's words were a shockwave that shook me to my core. "Your husband has a terminal condition," he said. "I'm sorry, but he has only about 6 months left." The news hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything, Richard was still my husband, the man I had once loved. The thought of him facing death alone was unexpectedly heartbreaking. But then a twisted idea crept into my mind. What if Richard never knew about his diagnosis? The thought was vindictive, petty even, but the seed was planted. I returned home, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Richard was his usual self, dismissive and absorbed in his phone. The irony of the situation was not lost on me. Here he was, wishing death upon others, unaware of his own impending doom. "Honey, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady. Richard barely glanced up. "What now, Eleanor? Can't you see I'm busy?" His indifference fueled my resolve. "It's important," I insisted. With a heavy sigh, he put down his phone. "Fine, what is it?" I took a deep breath. "The doctor called. He said you have 6 months to live." For a moment, Richard just stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief. Then a cruel smile twisted his lips. "6 months, huh?" he said, his voice laced with mockery. "Well, isn't that a twist of fate?" His reaction was devoid of fear or sadness. Instead, there was a perverse acceptance, as if he saw it as an opportunity to live without consequences. The following weeks were surreal. Richard began living as if each day was his last, squandering money on lavish items and extravagant nights out. He was like a man possessed, desperate to squeeze a lifetime into 6 months. And through it all, I played the part of the concerned wife, all the while keeping the dark secret that it was he, not I, who was living on borrowed time. As I watched Richard spiral into a reckless abandon, a part of me felt vindicated. This was his karma, a fitting end for a man who had shown nothing but selfishness and cruelty. But another part of me, a part I wasn't proud of, couldn't help but feel a twisted satisfaction in watching him unknowingly live out his last days in a delusion of immortality. It was a cruel game, one that I never imagined I'd play. But in this twisted tale of revenge, I was no longer just a victim. I was the architect of his downfall. As Richard's self-destruction escalated, a new character entered the stage of our twisted drama. It was a chilly evening in late autumn when she appeared at our doorstep, unannounced and unexpected. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with an air of confidence that belied her years. Her name was Annabelle. "May I help you?" I asked, eyeing her cautiously. "Mrs. Williams, I'm Annabelle. I think we need to talk about Richard," she said, her voice steady and composed. The pieces fell into place with a sinking feeling in my stomach. This was the woman Richard was having an affair with. The audacity of her showing up at my house was infuriating, yet I was intrigued by what she had to say. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "Let's hear what you have to say." We sat in the living room, an awkward tension hanging in the air. Annabelle was the first to break the silence. "I know about Richard's condition," she began, "and I think it would be best for everyone if you two separated. Richard deserves to spend his last months happy." The suggestion was outrageous. Not only was Annabelle asking me to step aside for her affair, but she also believed the lie that Richard was the one dying. "And why would I do that?" I asked, my voice laced with disdain. "Because it's what Richard wants," she replied, her tone almost pleading. "He's suffering, and staying in this marriage is only making it worse." Her words were like a slap in the face. This woman, this intruder, had the audacity to speak of suffering while she played a part in destroying my marriage. You speak of suffering, I said, my voice rising. But what do you know of the years of neglect, the emotional abuse, the utter loneliness of a loveless marriage? Annabelle's confidence seemed to waver, but she held her ground. I love him, and I know he loves me too. We plan to be together once it's over. The situation was absurd. Here I was, speaking to my husband's mistress about his fictional terminal illness, a lie that had spiraled out of control. Annabelle, you're living in a fantasy, I said coldly. Richard isn't the man you think he is, and this affair, it's just a game to him. She shook her head, a look of disbelief on her face. No, you're wrong. We have something real. I wanted to laugh, to shout, to tell her the truth about everything. But I held back, a part of me wanting to see how this farce would play out. Believe what you will, I said, standing up. But know this, Richard is not a man capable of love. He's a user, a manipulator, and sooner or later you'll see him for what he truly is. Annabelle stood up, her eyes betraying a hint of doubt. I guess we'll see, she said before turning and walking out. As the door closed behind her, I was left with a sense of emptiness. This game of deception and revenge was taking a toll on me. I was caught in a web of my own making, and with each passing day the lines between right and wrong blurred a little more. But there was no turning back now. The stage was set, the players in place. All that was left was to see this twisted drama to its bitter end. The days following Annabelle's visit were a twisted dance of deception and revelation. Richard's extravagant lifestyle reached new heights, and his nights out became more frequent. It was as if he was trying to outrun the clock, to squeeze every last drop of life from his remaining days. 6 months since the doctor's call, the day of reckoning finally arrived. Richard came home late, as had become his norm, reeking of alcohol and arrogance. I sat in the living room, the lights dimmed, waiting for him. Well, look at you, playing the waiting wife, Richard sneered as he stumbled in. What's the occasion, counting down the days to my demise? His words, meant to wound, barely scratched the surface of my resolve. I had grown immune to his barbs. Actually, yes, I replied calmly. It's been 6 months, Richard. Aren't you curious about how much time you have left? Richard laughed, a hollow sound filled with denial. I feel fine, Eleanor. Better than ever, in fact. Death can wait. The irony of his statement was almost amusing. He was so engrossed in his lie that he had lost touch with reality. But there's something you should know, I continued, my voice steady. It wasn't me who received that diagnosis 6 months ago. It was you. For a moment, there was silence. Richard's face, previously flushed with drunken confidence, paled. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The terminal illness, Richard. It's yours, I said, the words feeling heavy in the air. Richard's laughter was manic, tinged with hysteria. You're lying. This is just some sick game you're playing. But as the reality of my words began to sink in, his facade crumbled. The man who stood before me was no longer the arrogant Richard I had known. He was scared, lost, a shadow of his former self. You knew, all this time you knew? He stammered, his voice breaking. I did, I admitted, and I watched as you squandered your days, thinking they were mine. The room was filled with a tense silence, the weight of years of lies and deception hanging heavy between us. In that moment, I saw Richard for what he was, a man consumed by his own selfish desires, now faced with the consequences of his actions. The next morning, Richard was gone. He had left without a word, leaving behind only the echo of his broken pride. I stood in the empty house, a sense of relief washing over me. The game was over. The lies were unraveled. In his quest for a life free of responsibility, Richard had lost everything. As I stood there, I realized that this was not a victory. There was no joy in watching a man fall from grace, even one as undeserving as Richard. What I felt was a profound sense of freedom, the chains of a loveless marriage finally broken. The drama, the revenge, it was all over. I was free to start anew, to find peace in a life unburdened by the weight of Richard's deceit. It was a fresh start, a chance to rediscover the person I had lost in the shadow of a failing marriage. And as I looked out the window at the rising sun, I knew that this was just the beginning. A new chapter in my life was waiting to be written, and for the first time in a long time I was ready to embrace it. In the weeks that followed Richard's departure, a profound sense of tranquility settled over the house. It was as if his absence had lifted a heavy veil, allowing light and air to fill spaces darkened by years of resentment and pain. I spent my days reacquainting myself with the simple pleasures of life, reading books I had long neglected, tending to the garden that had once been my sanctuary, and reconnecting with old friends. One afternoon, Claire visited me. She looked frail, but her eyes still sparkled with the same sharp intelligence and warmth. We sat in the garden, surrounded by blooming flowers and the gentle hum of life. "Eleanor, I heard about Richard," Claire began, her voice tinged with sadness. "I'm sorry it had to end this way." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "It's all right, Claire. It was long overdue. We were both prisoners in that marriage. Now we're free." Claire nodded, a small smile gracing her lips. "You were always the daughter I never had, Eleanor. Richard's choices are his own. You shouldn't have to pay for his mistakes." Her words were a balm to my soul. In all the years of my tumultuous marriage, Claire had been a constant source of support and understanding. "Claire, I want to thank you," I said, my voice heavy with emotion, "for everything. You've been more of a family to me than anyone else." As we sat there, basking in the serenity of the garden, I realized how much of my life I had spent under Richard's shadow. But no more. I was my own person, with dreams and desires that extended beyond the confines of a loveless marriage. The next chapter of my life was just beginning, and I was determined to make it count. I would travel, write that book I always talked about, maybe even fall in love again. The possibilities were endless, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited about the future. As for Richard, I heard he had left town, chasing after some illusory freedom that would always be just out of reach. I felt no malice towards him, only a distant pity for a man who could never find contentment in what he had. Life, I had learned, was too short for regrets and bitterness. It was a gift to be cherished, a canvas to be painted with bold, bright colors. As Claire and I laughed and reminisced, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The drama, the pain, the revenge, it was all behind me. Ahead lay a path of my own making, a journey towards self-discovery and happiness. And as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the garden, I knew that this was just the beginning. A new chapter, a new life, a new Eleanor. "You think you married a simple girl, but you're clueless about who I really am," I whisper under my breath, my fingers tightening around the edge of the kitchen counter. The cold marble does little to soothe the burning fury inside me, ignited by Ronan's words slicing through the air from the living room. His laughter, laced with disdain, seeps through the walls, a stark contrast to the silence enveloping me in my refuge. "I mean, Alara's great and all, but she's not exactly the brightest. Got lucky marrying into our family, if you ask me," Ronan boasts on the phone, his voice dripping with a condescension that's become all too familiar. My heart races, every beat a reminder of the drastic shift our marriage has taken. From the charming suitor who'd once courted me with grand gestures and sweet nothings, to the man who now finds sport in belittling his wife to his friends. The transformation wasn't overnight, but the descent from indifference to outright contempt and control was swift. Working in my mother's boutique was supposed to be a temporary arrangement, a way to help out while searching for something more aligned with my degree. Yet here I stand, years later, still folding clothes and dodging my husband's barbs about my lack of ambition. "If only you knew," I mutter to the empty room, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Ronan's voice grows louder, pulling me from my thoughts. "Honestly, thought her family had more money. You know, with the boutique and all. Turns out, not so much." The revelation stings, not because of the truth in his words. Our financial struggles are no secret to me, but because of the implication. He married me under false pretenses, his affections as fabricated as the persona he paraded during our courtship. The facade crumbles a little more each day, revealing the true extent of his expectations. A hefty dowry, and a wife who would bend to his every whim. But beneath the veneer of the compliant spouse, a storm brews, fueled by the discovery of his hidden debts and gambling habits. The weight of his duplicity presses down on me, a constant reminder of the life I've been ensnared in. A plan begins to form, vague and unrefined, but it's a start. A way out of the shadows, to cast light on the man behind the mask. The thought is both terrifying and exhilarating. Patience, I remind myself, echoing my mother Sylvia's advice. She doesn't know the full extent of Ronan's transgressions, but she's always sensed the turmoil beneath my calm exterior. The sound of Ronan ending his call pulls me back to the present, the immediate need to conceal my turmoil paramount. I straighten, schooling my features into a mask of indifference before stepping back into the living room. Ronan doesn't spare me a glance, too engrossed in his phone, and for a moment, I'm grateful for the neglect. The evening passes with minimal interaction, a dance we've perfected over the months. But as I lay in bed, Ronan's snores filling the room, I can't help but feel the shift within me. The veil has lifted, and with it, the resolve to no longer be the victim in my own story. Tonight, the seeds of rebellion are sown, watered by the bitter tears of realization and the silent vow of retribution. Tomorrow, I begin to fight back, armed with the truth and the determination to reclaim my life from the ruins of a marriage built on deceit. The sun hadn't even crept through the curtains before Ronan's voice pierced the morning silence, a harbinger of the storm to come. "Alara, what's this? The coffee tastes like mud." His words, sharp and unforgiving, sliced through the last remnants of sleep clinging to my consciousness. I must have mixed up the measurements, I stammer, my voice barely above a whisper as I rush to his side, mug in hand. The truth is, the coffee is the same as it always is, but with Ronan, any minor deviation, or imagined one, is grounds for criticism. "Useless," he mutters under his breath, pushing the mug into my hands with such force that the hot liquid sloshes over the sides, scalding my skin. I wince, but dare not let the pain show. Showing weakness only fuels his disdain. As I turn to remake the coffee, trying to steady my trembling hands, Ronan's voice follows me, relentless. "And make sure breakfast is ready on time today. I have an important meeting. Can't afford to be late because you're dawdling." The morning wears on, each moment laden with tension. Breakfast is a silent affair, Ronan buried in his phone, occasionally throwing out commands or criticisms. The eggs are too runny, the toast not crisp enough. It seems there's no end to his displeasure. It's during these moments, caught in the cyclone of Ronan's demands, that I ponder the drastic change in him. The man I married, who once spoke of love and partnership, now sees me as little more than a servant in his grand scheme of life. The realization stings, a bitter pill swallowed daily. The door slams shut behind him, a temporary reprieve from his tirades. But the silence left in his wake is heavy, a constant reminder of the farce my life has become. I clear the breakfast dishes, my movements automatic, thoughts miles away. It's in this mechanical state that I find the envelope, used hidden beneath a pile of unopened bills, a reminder of another of Ronan's secrets. His gambling habits, once a mere whisper of concern, have ballooned into a full-blown storm, threatening to engulf us both. The numbers scrawled across the bills are astronomical, figures that we can't possibly hope to cover with the boutique's modest earnings and Ronan's dwindling salary. I sit, the weight of the envelope in my hands, a tangible symbol of the lies and deceit that have woven their way through our marriage. It's this moment, this tangible proof of Ronan's betrayal, that solidifies my resolve. No longer can I stand idly by, a spectator in my own life. The day drags on, each tick of the clock a reminder of the evening confrontation that awaits. When Ronan returns, his mood is foul, the remnants of whatever transpired at his meeting written clearly across his face. Before I can brace myself, he's upon me, his words a torrent of blame and anger. "Do you have any idea how much pressure I'm under? And what do I come home to? A wife who can't even make a decent cup of coffee." The accusations sting, but they also fuel a fire within me. "Ronan, we need to talk about the bills. The gambling debts. We can't." He cuts me off with a scoff, his eyes narrowing. "Oh, so now you're keeping tabs on me? I work day in, day out, and this is the thanks I get?" The argument spirals, his anger a palpable force that threatens to consume the room. But amidst the chaos, a clarity settles over me. This isn't just about surviving Ronan's tirades anymore. It's about reclaiming my life, piece by shattered piece. "I won't let you drag us down with your debts," I assert, my voice steadier than I feel. "We're going to fix this, but not like this. Not with lies." Ronan's response is a sneer, a promise of more battles to come. But as I stand my ground, I realize that this is just the beginning. The facade of our marriage has crumbled, revealing the rot beneath, and it's up to me to clear the wreckage, to forge a path out of the despair Ronan has cloaked us in. A year into our marriage, the facade of harmony has not just cracked but shattered, revealing the grim reality of our union. Ronan's abuse, both verbal and emotional, has escalated, pushing me into a corner of isolation and despair. Yet, it's in this darkness that a plan begins to take shape, a beacon of hope in the relentless storm. Sitting across from my mother, Sylvia, in the dim light of the boutique after hours, I finally muster the courage to voice the truth. Mom, Ronan's not who we thought he was. The gambling, the debts, it's worse than I ever imagined. Sylvia's expression, a mix of concern and resolve, doesn't waver. Alara, you've been carrying this burden alone for too long. It's time we face this head on. But how? He's made it clear he won't change. And now there's talk of selling the boutique to cover his debts. I confess, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. We won't let that happen, Sylvia asserts, her voice firm. It's time Ronan understood the consequences of his actions. We've been silent for too long. The strategy we devise is simple, yet daring. We'll confront Ronan, not with accusations, but with the stark reality of our financial situation. It's a gamble, but one we're willing to take to expose his true motives. The opportunity presents itself one evening when Ronan, in a rare moment of calm, mentions the boutique. Alara, we need to talk about selling. It could solve a lot of our problems. Standing in our living room, I feel Sylvia's supportive presence behind me as I face him. Ronan, the boutique isn't the problem, it's the solution. Your gambling is what's brought us here. Ronan's reaction is immediate, his face contorting with anger. So this is my fault? I'm working day and night, and you blame me? It's not about blame. It's about reality. Your debts are drowning us, and selling the boutique won't fix that, I reply, my voice steady despite the shaking of my hands. Sylvia steps forward, her demeanor unyielding. The boutique has been in our family for generations. It's not just a business, it's our legacy, and we won't let it be destroyed by recklessness. Ronan's gaze shifts between us, a mixture of surprise and defiance in his eyes. You think you can dictate what I do? It's my name on the line. But it's our lives at stake, I counter, emboldened by my mother's strength. We're willing to work with you, Ronan, but not at the expense of our future. The standoff ends with Ronan storming out, his threats echoing behind him. But in his absence, a sense of unity fortifies between my mother and me. For the first time in months, I feel a flicker of hope. The following days are tense, with Ronan's mood swinging wildly. Yet there's a shift in the air, a sense that the tide may be turning. My resolve hardens with each passing moment, the plan to expose Ronan's true motives gaining clarity. One evening, as I sit alone in the boutique pondering the path ahead, a knock at the door jolts me from my thoughts. It's Jude, an old friend and confidant, whose unexpected visit brings a sense of normalcy to my chaotic world. Alara, I've been worried about you. How are you holding up? Jude's concern is genuine, a balm to the wounds inflicted by months of turmoil. It's complicated. Ronan's not the man I thought he was, I admit, the words flowing more freely than I anticipated. Jude listens intently, his expression a mix of anger and sympathy. You don't have to go through this alone, Alara. If there's anything I can do. It's in this moment, confiding in Jude, that the final piece of our plan crystallizes. Ronan's actions, once hidden behind closed doors, will soon be brought to light. With Jude's unexpected support, the journey toward justice and revenge seems less daunting. Together, we begin to lay the groundwork for Ronan's public exposure, a step toward reclaiming my life from the ruins of a marriage built on deceit and manipulation. The flu hit me like a freight train, leaving me bedridden and weak. In any other household, sickness might elicit a modicum of sympathy or care. But in mine, it's seen as nothing more than an inconvenience, a failure to fulfill my duties as Ronan's wife. Alara, this place is a mess, Ronan barks, his voice booming through the small, dark, cluttered apartment that's felt more like a prison than a home these past months. And what's this? You're still in bed? It's nearly noon. Struggling to sit up, I clutch the blanket tighter around my shivering body. I'm really not well, Ronan. I can barely stand, I manage to say, my voice weak and hoarse. Ronan's glare is icy as he surveys the room, his disgust palpable. Sick? Or just lazy? You know, I can't rely on you for anything. His words cut deeper than the sharp pains racking my body. It's in this moment of vulnerability, faced with his unrelenting cruelty, that the resolve within me hardens further. I need to escape this cycle of abuse, not just for my sake, but for my sanity. As Ronan storms out, presumably to find solace in his vices, I'm left alone with my thoughts and a growing sense of desperation. It's then that I remember Jude's offer of support. Picking up my phone feels like lifting a boulder, but the need for an ally, for someone to understand, gives me strength. Jude answers on the second ring. Alara? How are you? Jude, I need help, I admit, the admission of weakness bringing tears to my eyes. There's no hesitation on his end. I'll be right there, he says, and the line goes dead. When Jude arrives, the concern in his eyes is a stark contrast to the disdain I've grown accustomed to from Ronan. He doesn't recoil at the sight of the disarray or my disheveled state. Instead, he steps forward, ready to offer whatever aid he can. Alara, tell me what to do. How can I help? Jude asks, his voice steady and comforting. Just being here is more than enough, I reply, a small smile breaking through the gloom. Together, we tidy up the space, his presence a calming force in the storm that has become my life. It's during this rare moment of peace that I confide in Jude the full extent of Ronan's behavior, the manipulation, the debts, and the emotional torment. Jude listens in silence, his expression hardening with each revelation. This can't go on, Alara. You deserve so much better, Jude says once I've finished, his conviction clear. I know, but I'm not sure what to do. I feel so trapped, I confess, the weight of my situation bearing down on me. Jude's response is immediate and resolute. We'll find a way. You're not alone in this. Remember that. As Jude leaves, promising to return with help, I'm left with a newfound sense of determination. His visit, though brief, has reignited the flame of resistance within me. I can't change the past, but with Jude's support, I can fight for a future free from Ronan's tyranny. The days that follow are a blur of planning and whispered conversations. Jude becomes an invaluable ally, offering both emotional support and practical assistance. Together, we begin to document Ronan's abuses, compiling evidence for the day when we can finally expose him and break free from his grasp. It's a dangerous game we're playing, one fraught with risk and uncertainty, but the alternative, a life of continued abuse and despair, is no longer an option. With each passing day, my resolve strengthens, fueled by the support of my unlikely ally and the hope for a brighter future. The path to freedom is fraught with obstacles, but for the first time in a long time, I dare to believe that escape is within reach. Jude's unexpected visit had breathed new life into my wilted spirit, his presence a beacon of hope in the unending night that had become my existence. It was during one of these visits, as we sat plotting our next move in the quiet sanctuary of my mother's boutique after hours, that fate decided to twist the knife a bit further. Ronan, in a rare and unforeseen move, decided to grace the boutique with his presence. His sudden appearance at the door was like a storm cloud blotting out the sun, casting a shadow over the newfound hope I had clung to so desperately. Alara, what the hell is this? Playing shop while the house falls apart. Ronan's voice boomed through the space, his words laced with venom. Jude, ever the pillar of calm in the face of adversity, stood beside me, an unwavering ally against Ronan's tempest. Everything's under control, Ronan. Maybe you should head back, Jude suggested, his tone firm yet diplomatic, a stark contrast to Ronan's aggression. Ronan's eyes narrowed, his gaze flitting between Jude and me, suspicion igniting like wildfire in his eyes. And who are you to tell me what to do? Another of Alara's little projects? The tension in the air was palpable, a tangible force that seemed to squeeze the very breath from my lungs. Yet, despite the fear that clawed at my insides, a spark of defiance flickered to life. Jude is a friend, someone who actually cares about my well-being, I retorted, my voice stronger than I felt. Ronan's laugh was cruel, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. A friend, huh? Don't make me laugh. You're pathetic, Alara, both of you. It was then, amidst the torrent of Ronan's insults, that Jude did something unexpected. He pulled out his phone, subtly positioning it to capture the tirade. Ronan, too caught up in his own fury, failed to notice the silent witness documenting his every word. As Ronan stormed out, leaving a trail of bitter words in his wake, Jude turned to me, his expression grave. I got it all on video, Alara. This This could be what we need to expose him. The realization of what Jude had done, of the weapon we now possessed, was overwhelming. A mixture of fear and exhilaration flooded through me, the implications of our actions both terrifying and thrilling. "Thank you, Jude. I don't know what to say." Jude's smile was gentle, a balm to the chaos that had erupted. "You don't have to say anything. Just know you're not alone." In the days that followed, the video became the cornerstone of our plan. Jude, with contacts in local media and a keen sense of justice, began laying the groundwork for Ronan's exposure. Our meetings were filled with whispered strategies and cautious optimism, each step forward a delicate dance on the tightrope of revenge. The decision to go public was not made lightly. The potential fallout loomed large, a specter of consequence that could not be ignored. Yet, the need for justice, for an end to the cycle of abuse, outweighed the fear. "It's time, Alara. Are you ready?" Jude asked one evening, his finger hovering over the send button that would catapult our carefully guarded secret into the unforgiving light of public scrutiny. Taking a deep breath, I nodded, the weight of the moment settling heavy on my shoulders. "I'm ready. Let's do this." With a single click, Jude set the wheels of retribution in motion. The video, a damning testament to Ronan's true nature, was sent spiraling into the digital ether, a harbinger of the storm to come. As we waited for the inevitable backlash, a sense of peace settled over me. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I dared to hope for a future free from the shadows of Ronan's tyranny. The battle was far from over, but with Jude by my side, I felt invincible. Together, we had ignited the flame of justice, and now there was no turning back. The morning after sending the video felt like the calm before the storm. The silence was almost deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos I knew was brewing on the horizon. Jude and I met at the boutique, our unofficial war room, waiting for the inevitable explosion that would come once Ronan discovered his sins laid bare for all to see. It wasn't long before the first signs of the tempest appeared. My phone buzzed relentlessly, notifications flooding in as the video spread like wildfire across social media platforms. The local news had picked up the story, amplifying it further, the headline screaming betrayal and deceit. Alara Morris exposes husband's abuse and deceit. It read, a simple yet powerful declaration of my stand against Ronan. As the world watched, Ronan's carefully constructed facade crumbled. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers voiced their support for me, their words a balm to the wounds inflicted over the years. But with the support came backlash, Ronan's defenders crawling from the woodwork, their words sharp and unforgiving. I was preparing for another day at the boutique when Ronan stormed in, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. "You've ruined me, Alara," he spat, his voice trembling with fury. "How dare you air our dirty laundry for the world to see?" Standing my ground, I met his gaze, the fear that once would have crippled me, now replaced by a steadfast resolve. "No, Ronan, you did this to yourself. I'm just shedding light on the truth." The confrontation was intense, Ronan's anger clashing with my newfound strength. Jude was there, a silent sentinel, ready to intervene if necessary. But it was clear Ronan's power over me had diminished, his threats empty in the face of my determination. "You'll pay for this," Ronan hissed, a final desperate attempt to regain control. But his words no longer held sway over me. "I already have, Ronan. Now it's your turn." The fallout from the video was swift and merciless. Ronan's professional life unraveled as his employer, faced with public pressure, terminated his position. His social circle, once a fortress of support, crumbled as friends and acquaintances distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with a man exposed as an abuser and manipulator. With each passing day, the reality of his situation seemed to weigh heavier on Ronan, his once confident demeanor replaced by a sullen, defeated air. The tables had turned, and the predator found himself the prey, isolated and ostracized by the very community he had once dominated. For me, the days became a blur of interviews and meetings, my story a rallying cry for those who had suffered in silence. The support was overwhelming, a testament to the power of truth and the resilience of the human spirit. As Ronan's world collapsed around him, a sense of vindication filled me. It wasn't joy. There was no joy in the pain and suffering that had led to this moment, but a deep, profound sense of justice. For too long, I had lived in the shadows of Ronan's tyranny, but no more. The battle was far from over. Legal proceedings loomed on the horizon, a daunting path fraught with its own challenges. But as I stood in the boutique, now a beacon of hope and defiance, I knew I was ready to face whatever came next. With Jude by my side and a community of supporters behind me, I stepped into the light, a survivor no longer defined by the abuse I had endured, but by the strength I had found in my fight for justice. Ronan's downfall was not the end of my story, but the beginning of a new chapter, one written on my terms, in my voice. The repercussions of Ronan's exposure reverberated far beyond the initial shockwave, eroding the very foundation of his existence. His professional downfall was swift, a stark reminder of the consequences of his actions. But it was the personal fallout that truly marked the beginning of his undoing. Ronan, once a fixture in social circles, now found himself ostracized, a pariah in the community he had dominated. The isolation was a bitter pill to swallow, each day a reminder of the empire of lies he had built and lost. I watched from a distance, my resolve unshaken, as Ronan grappled with his new reality. The boutique became my sanctuary, a place of strength and solidarity. Jude was a constant presence, his support unwavering as we navigated the aftermath together. It was during one of our strategy sessions that Ronan made his last desperate attempt to regain control. He barged into the boutique, his eyes wild with desperation. "Alara, you have to stop this. You're destroying everything." His plea was met with cold indifference. "You did this to yourself, Ronan. I'm just seeking justice." Ronan's gaze flickered between Jude and me, searching for any sign of weakness. But there was none to be found. "You'll regret this," he muttered, a hollow threat that no longer held any power. The legal proceedings were grueling, a drawn-out battle that tested my limits. But with each passing day, I grew stronger, more confident in my pursuit of justice. Ronan's attempts to undermine me fell on deaf ears, his credibility shattered by his own actions. As the divorce settlement was finalized, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. The court awarded me a substantial portion of Ronan's assets, a small compensation for the years of deceit and abuse. But it was more than just financial security. It was a symbol of my victory over Ronan, a tangible proof of my newfound independence. "You're free now, Alara," Jude said, his voice filled with pride. The words resonated deep within me, a beacon of hope in the aftermath of the storm. I know, it's finally over. In the months that followed, Ronan's life continued to unravel. His attempts to rebuild his reputation were futile, the stain of his actions indelible. The man who had once held so much power was now a shadow of his former self, struggling to navigate a world that had turned its back on him. For me, the end of my marriage to Ronan marked the beginning of a new chapter. The boutique thrived, a testament to my resilience and determination. And with each passing day, I found strength in my independence, my spirit no longer weighed down by the chains of the past. As I stood in the boutique, surrounded by friends and supporters, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me here. The road had been long and fraught with challenges, but I had emerged stronger, a survivor in the truest sense. "Here's to new beginnings," Jude toasted, raising his glass in a salute. I smiled, my heart full of gratitude for the support that had carried me through the darkest of times. "To new beginnings," I echoed, my voice steady and sure. The battle was over, but my story was just beginning. A story of hope, of courage, and of a woman who refused to be silenced. Ronan's downfall was not just a victory for me, but for all those who had suffered in silence, a beacon of light in the darkness. As I looked around at the faces of my friends and supporters, I knew that this was not the end, but a new beginning. A chance to rebuild, to dream, and to live a life free from the shadows of the past. In the aftermath of Ronan's downfall, life began to take on a new rhythm, one marked by peace rather than turmoil. The boutique, once a silent witness to my suffering, became a vibrant hub of creativity and empowerment. With each passing day, I found myself stepping more confidently into the role of proprietor, my mother's legacy now firmly in my hands. It was during a quiet morning, the sun casting a warm glow over the newly arranged displays, that Sylvia approached me, her eyes shining with unspoken pride. "You've done well, Alara. Your strength has turned this place into more than just a boutique. It's a symbol of hope." Her words, simple yet profound, filled me with a sense of accomplishment. "Thanks, Mom. It feels good to be free to make a difference." The boutique had become more than just a business. It was a community. Women from all walks of life came not just to shop, but to share their stories, finding solace and strength in the solidarity we offered. And as my story became known, the boutique's mission evolved, transforming into a beacon for those seeking to reclaim their lives from the shadows of abuse. One afternoon, as I was rearranging a window display, a familiar face appeared on the other side of the glass. Jude, his supportive presence a constant throughout my journey, stepped inside, a smile playing on his lips. "Looks like you've turned this place into something truly special, Alara," he commented, his gaze sweeping over the vibrant interior. I smiled, acknowledging the truth in his words. "It's become more than I ever imagined, and it's all thanks to the support of friends like you." Jude's smile widened. "I wouldn't have missed it for the world. You've turned your pain into something powerful, Alara. You should be proud." Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a customer, a young woman whose eyes held a familiar flicker of resolve. As Jude excused himself, I turned my attention to her, ready to offer the same support that had once been extended to me. The boutique was not just a place of business. It had become a sanctuary, a place where stories of pain and resilience were woven into the very fabric of its existence. And as I shared my journey, I found strength in the shared experiences, a collective healing that transcended the personal. In the months that followed, my advocacy work grew, the boutique serving as a launching pad for initiatives aimed at supporting survivors of domestic abuse. Seminars, workshops, and support groups filled our calendar, each event a step towards breaking the silence that had once kept me prisoner. As I closed the boutique one evening, the last rays of sunlight casting a soft glow over the empty space, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The journey had been long, filled with moments of despair and triumph, but as I stood there, surrounded by the tangible evidence of my resilience, I felt a deep, abiding sense of peace. Ronan's shadow no longer loomed over my life. Instead, I had emerged from the darkness, my spirit unbroken, my resolve unwavering. The boutique, once a reminder of my pain, was now a testament to my strength, a symbol of hope for those walking the path I had once trod. As I locked the door and stepped out into the evening, the cool air brushing against my skin, I felt a profound sense of closure. The battle was over, and I had emerged victorious, not just over Ronan, but over the fear and doubt that had once held me captive. Walking away from the boutique, I looked up at the stars, their light a reminder of the endless possibilities that lay ahead. The future was mine to shape, a blank canvas awaiting the touch of my hand. And as I took those first steps into the unknown, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them with the same courage and determination that had led me to this moment of rebirth. The end of my marriage to Ronan was not just an ending. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, healing, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow.
Parents gave my brother a house and business loan, but left me empty-handed. All right, here we go. So, I'm Alex, 32, married to my wife, Grace, who's 31. We've been together for 6 years, working hard to build a decent life for ourselves. We've got a modest apartment, both of us holding down jobs, paying bills, and all that good stuff. Nothing flashy, but we're comfortable, and that's all I ever really wanted. Well, all I ever wanted, until I realized just how messed up my family dynamic was. Here's the thing. I'm the older child, and then there's my younger brother Liam, who's 29. Growing up, we had the usual sibling rivalry stuff. He was the annoying little brother. I was the one who had to play the responsible older kid role. But even then, I could tell something was different in the way our parents treated us. It wasn't in-your-face favoritism, but it was there, quietly, like an unspoken rule in the house. At first I didn't mind. I figured, hey, every family's got their quirks, right? So I did what I was supposed to do. Went to school, got decent grades, graduated, went to college, and worked part-time jobs to pay my way through. I didn't expect my parents to cover my college expenses or anything. I mean, it would have been nice, but I wasn't holding my breath. My parents were never rolling in money, but we got by, and I'd always been independent. I've been used to handling things on my own, so working and studying was just normal to me. Now Liam? He took a different path. College wasn't his thing, and he wasn't shy about saying so. I don't judge him for that. College isn't for everyone, right? But he kind of drifted through his early 20s without much of a plan. While I was stressing over assignments, balancing work, and trying to keep my head above water financially, Liam was, well, let's just say he was figuring things out. No part-time jobs, no real structure, just him and his dreams. Around 24, Liam decides he wants to open a restaurant. No experience, no real plan, just this idea that he'd be his own boss and make it big in the food industry. The surprising part? My parents, who've always been super careful with money, suddenly decided to back him. Not just a little either. They somehow managed to pull together $50,000 to help him launch this restaurant. Now, here's where it gets wild. Not only did they give him 50 grand for the restaurant, but they also handed him the down payment for a house that same year. I didn't even know they were capable of putting that kind of money together. It wasn't some mansion or anything, but it was a decent little place. Meanwhile, I'm still paying off student loans, working my ass off, and renting a small apartment. I didn't even find out about this right away. They didn't make a big announcement like, "Oh, hey, Alex, by the way, we're giving your brother a boatload of cash." Nope. I found out when Liam casually mentioned it during a family dinner. He was talking about the renovations he was planning for his new place, how excited he was to be his own boss, and how great it was that mom and dad believed in him. I just sat there, trying to process it all. After dinner, I pulled my parents aside and asked about it. I'll never forget the way they looked at each other, like they'd been caught doing something they knew they shouldn't have done but weren't sorry for. My mom shrugged and said, "Well, Liam needs a little extra help. You've always been the independent one, Alex. We knew you'd be fine on your own." I was stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They just handed over tens of thousands of dollars to Liam, no questions asked. But when I was scraping by in college, working 2 jobs, they didn't offer a single dime. It wasn't just about the money, though that stung too. It was the realization that, in their eyes, I didn't need help because I was fine. Apparently, my success or struggle didn't even register as something worth supporting. So, I asked them flat out, "Did it ever cross your minds to offer me any help when I was in school, working nonstop just to make it by?" My dad gave this dismissive look and said, "You've always been driven, Alex. You didn't need our help. Liam just doesn't have that same drive." And that was it. End of conversation. I was floored. I felt like they just shrugged off years of my hard work, of me trying to be the responsible one they always expected me to be. Suddenly, it all felt so pointless. They were always going to see Liam as the one who needed help, the one who needed a little boost, while I'd always be the one expected to make it on my own. After that, I started pulling back. I didn't visit as much, stopped calling them as often. Every time I did see them, it was like this reminder that I was somehow less in their eyes. Not less successful, just less deserving of their attention and support. They didn't seem to notice my absence at first. They'd still call to update me on Liam's restaurant, ask if I'd seen his new place, talk about how proud they were of him. It was always about Liam. When Grace and I got engaged, we kept it small. We posted some photos on social media, and that's how my parents found out. I know that might seem harsh, but honestly, they hadn't been much of a part of my life for years. Why would I suddenly bring them into this major moment? They texted me after they saw the photos, saying they were disappointed that I hadn't told them personally, that they felt excluded, but they didn't even bother to congratulate me. The irony hit hard. They were upset I hadn't told them about my wedding, yet I was expected to be happy for Liam getting a business and a house on their dime. I finally decided it was time to speak up. I sent them a text, laying it all out, how their treatment over the years had made me feel like an afterthought. I told them it wasn't about the money, it was about how they'd chosen to support him in every way possible while leaving me to fend for myself. I don't know what I was expecting, but it definitely wasn't the response I got. My mom called me ungrateful, saying I was holding a grudge over nothing, while my dad told me to grow up and stop making everything about me. Apparently, to them, my whole life has just been some minor detail, not worth their support or interest. So here I am, questioning everything. Is it so unreasonable to want a little acknowledgement, a little support for once? I've tried to make peace with it, but it's hard to just let it go, and every conversation with them just reminds me of how little I apparently matter. All right, so after I'd finally told my parents how I felt about the whole favoring Liam situation, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd get it. I figured they'd at least take a step back, maybe try to see things from my point of view. I wasn't looking for an apology or anything dramatic, just a little bit of acknowledgement, but that's not what happened. A few days later, my mom called me. I thought maybe it was her way of reaching out to make things right, so I picked up. But right from the start, I could tell that wasn't why she was calling. The conversation kicked off with her saying, "I'm disappointed in you, Alex." That was her opener. No, "How are you?" No, "Let's talk." Just straight-up disappointment. She didn't waste any time letting me know that she thought I was being selfish and childish for even bringing up my issues with how they'd treated me compared to Liam. She was saying things like, "Family is supposed to be supportive of each other, Alex. You're acting like you're above that." I tried to stay calm, really tried, but hearing her throw those words around was infuriating. I told her again that it wasn't just about the money they gave Liam. It was about how they'd been willing to support him in every way imaginable, while I'd been left to figure everything out on my own. It was like they never even saw me struggling through college, balancing work and all of that. Meanwhile, they'd handed Liam a business and a house without him lifting a finger. But she wasn't hearing it. She kept saying that I was holding a grudge over something that wasn't that big of a deal. According to her, I should just be happy that Liam was doing well and that our family was successful because of him. She even said, "You've always been so driven, Alex. You didn't need our help, but Liam, he needed that support to get going." That's when I lost it a little. I asked her straight up, "Why did you never think I needed help too? Why is it so hard for you to just admit that you've always favored Liam even when I was struggling?" I could hear her getting frustrated, like she was tired of explaining the same thing over and over. And that's when she hit me with the line that really got under my skin. "You're just jealous of your brother," she said. "I don't know why you're so bitter about his success. You should be proud of him." Jealous? I was stunned. I'd opened up about how left out and unsupported I felt, and her takeaway was that I was jealous of my little brother. I told her, "Mom, this isn't about jealousy. It's about feeling like I'm nothing more than an afterthought to you guys. I'm not angry that Liam is successful. I'm angry that you think he's worth supporting and I'm not." She didn't like that. Her tone got sharper, and she said something along the lines of, "Well, we did the best we could for both of you, and if you're too blind to see that, then I don't know what else to say." That's when I realized there was no point in trying to get through to her. My parents had already made up their minds about who I was in their story. I was the independent one, the capable one, the one who didn't need anything from them. And they were sticking to that version of events, no matter what I said. So I ended the call. But it didn't stop there. Later that night, my dad decided to chime in with his own 2 cents via text. He sent me this long message about how I was overreacting and that it was ridiculous to let something as small as a financial favor to Liam ruin the family bond. He went on about how family is more important than petty grievances and how I needed to mature and let it go. He even said that I was self-centered for making them feel bad about helping their son succeed. That text really got to me. All those years of working hard, of sacrificing and hustling to make a life for myself, and they had the nerve to call me self-centered? They were mad because I dared to ask for a little recognition of the unfair treatment. Grace found me reading the text, and when I explained what happened, she just shook her head. She told me that I had every right to feel hurt, and that my parents were completely out of line. She reminded me that I'd put up with this kind of favoritism for way too long, and that if I kept letting it slide, they'd just continue treating me this way. Honestly, Grace has always been the voice of reason in my life. She pointed out that my parents probably weren't going to change overnight, if ever. They were so locked into this idea that I was the one who didn't need help, that they couldn't see how hurtful their actions had been, and they definitely didn't like being called out on it. After sleeping on it, I decided to put some boundaries in place. I wasn't going to keep letting them guilt trip me every time I spoke up for myself. I sent a text back to my dad, short and to the point. I basically said, "I'm not overreacting and I'm not going to apologize for sharing how I feel. I'm hurt, and if you can't understand that, then maybe we need to take a step back for a while." The silence that followed was pretty telling. No calls, no texts, nothing. They didn't reach out after that, not even to check in or make peace. For once, I didn't feel guilty. I felt relieved, like I'd finally taken a stand for myself instead of just keeping quiet and letting them walk all over me. It's strange, though. Even after all of that, there was a small part of me that hoped they'd come around. I wanted them to at least try to understand. But as days turned into weeks with no word from them, I started to realize that they were probably never going to see things from my side. I mean, if they hadn't gotten it by now, they probably never would. That's where things are right now. Grace has been incredible through all of this, reminding me that family doesn't get a free pass to treat you however they want just because you share the same blood. I've started to accept that my parents and I may never see eye to eye, and honestly, I'm coming to terms with it. It's just tough because, as much as I want to let go, there's still that nagging feeling of betrayal that's hard to shake off. For now, I'm taking a break from them. I need time to figure things out and to decide if I even want a relationship with people who can't see the hurt they've caused. So after weeks of silence from my parents, just when I thought things were finally settling, my phone buzzes one afternoon. It's Liam. He hasn't reached out to me in ages, so seeing his name pop up was like a punch to the gut. I didn't know what to expect, but after a minute of staring at my phone, I decided to pick up. Right away, he dives into it. No small talk, no, how's it going? Just, hey, I wanted to talk to you about all this stuff with mom and dad. I knew where this was headed, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to hear him out. Maybe, just maybe, he'd have some perspective that could help me understand. But no. Within minutes, it was clear he was just as clueless as my parents. Liam starts going on about how he doesn't understand why I'm making a big deal out of everything. He kept saying, Mom and Dad are just doing what they think is best, and how he felt like I was blowing things way out of proportion. It was honestly mind-boggling to sit there and listen to him, realizing he had no concept of what I'd been going through. I asked him, Liam, do you even get why I'm upset? It's not just about the money or the house. It's about how they've always prioritized you, how they were willing to hand you everything while I had to scrape by on my own. Does that not seem unfair to you? But he just shrugged it off like I was talking about the weather. Well, you always seemed fine, he said, like that explained everything. You've always been the one who has it together. I don't know what you want from them or me. The conversation was going nowhere fast, but I kept pushing. I told him how hurt I was, how for years I'd felt like the backup kid they only paid attention to when it was convenient. I was hoping something might click for him, that he'd at least acknowledge it was messed up. But instead he hit me with, look, they just helped me out a little because I needed it more. It's not like I asked for it. A little help? This guy got a business and a house and he calls that a little help? I almost laughed. It was like talking to someone who had lived a completely different life than me, like he'd grown up with different parents or something. But I guess, in a way, he did. Liam had parents who coddled him, who supported him financially and emotionally whenever he needed it. I had parents who expected me to figure it all out by myself. When I tried to explain this, he got defensive, saying things like, but you turned out fine, didn't you? And they probably thought you didn't need their help. At that point, it became clear that he wasn't going to get it. He honestly believed that because I'd managed to scrape by, it somehow justified everything. It was like he couldn't wrap his head around the idea that just because I turned out fine didn't mean the road to get here wasn't hell. Then he dropped this gem. I didn't ask them to give me money or buy me a house. They offered, so what was I supposed to do? Say no? He said it like I was somehow the unreasonable one for being upset about something he couldn't control. It was honestly exhausting. I told him, Liam, it's not about you asking for it. It's about the fact that they offered it to you without even considering that I might need a little help too. That's what hurts. But he just brushed it off, saying, well, you're the older brother, Alex. You're supposed to have it together. That was the last straw. I couldn't believe he actually thought that way. I mean, maybe my parents had trained him to see things that way, but it didn't make it any less frustrating. At that point, I knew continuing the conversation was pointless. He wasn't going to see things from my perspective, and he was just going to keep defending our parents and his right to accept their help. I told him, you know what, Liam? I don't expect you to understand. You got lucky. You were their priority, and you're right. You don't have to apologize for that. But don't expect me to sit around and pretend like it's fair either. I'm done trying to explain myself to people who don't want to understand. There was a pause, and then he said, I just don't get why you're so bitter about it. He sounded genuinely confused, like he couldn't comprehend why any of this would bother me. I didn't have the energy to keep explaining, so I just ended the call. There was no point dragging it out any longer. After hanging up, I sat there, feeling a weird mix of relief and frustration. It was clear to me that Liam was never going to get it. To him, the world was exactly as it should be. He'd been handed opportunities and support without having to ask for it, and he couldn't see why anyone else would be upset about that. I think that conversation really sealed it for me. Up until that point, there was a small part of me that hoped maybe someone in my family would understand where I was coming from. But after talking to Liam, I realized that they were all wrapped up in this narrative they'd built about me. The strong, independent son who didn't need anything. They'd decided I was fine on my own, so that was that. Grace came home later and found me sitting on the couch, clearly still fuming. She didn't even have to ask. She just sat down beside me and listened while I vented. I told her every frustrating detail, from how Liam thought I was overreacting to how he genuinely believed I should just be happy that he'd been given so much support. She let me talk it out, and then she said something that really hit home. She told me, maybe it's time to let go of the idea that they'll ever understand, Alex. You've done everything you can to make your side clear. And if they're not willing to see it, that's on them, not you. She was right, of course. I'd been holding on to this hope that if I just explained it well enough, if I just laid it out in a way that made sense, my family would finally understand. But the truth was, they didn't want to understand. They were comfortable with their version of events, where I was the strong one and Liam was the one who needed them. Changing that story would mean admitting they'd made mistakes, and I knew now that they weren't willing to do that. That night, I decided I needed some real distance from all of them. Not just a break, but actual space to live my life without their constant judgments and guilt trips hanging over me. It was tough to accept, but I knew it was the only way I was going to find any peace. For the first time in a while, I felt like I was finally taking control of the situation. I was done chasing their approval or hoping they'd magically change. If they wanted to keep living in their little world where I was fine and Liam was the one who needed them, then fine. They could have that world. I just didn't need to be a part of it. So, after that last conversation with Liam, I was ready to step back from the whole family situation. I was exhausted from explaining myself to people who just weren't going to get it. And honestly, I thought I'd made that clear enough in my last text to my parents. But apparently they didn't get the hint. About a week later, I got this massive email from my dad. He starts off by saying that he's disappointed in how I'm handling things and goes on this long-winded rant about how family is everything and that I'm ruining our bond by holding a grudge. It was paragraph after paragraph of this guilt-trippy nonsense about how I'm being immature and how I need to grow up and move on. I couldn't believe it. He didn't even acknowledge anything I'd said in my last message. It was like he was talking at me, not to me. There was no attempt to understand my perspective or even a hint of regret for how things had gone down. It was just a long lecture about how I was overreacting and making life harder for everyone. I stared at that email for a while, debating if it was even worth replying. Part of me wanted to fire back with everything I'd been holding in, but I knew it'd just be more wasted energy. I'd already laid it out for them, told them exactly how hurt I felt, how their actions over the years had made me feel like I didn't matter. They'd ignored all of that and decided to spin it as me being ungrateful or jealous. So I just left it on read and didn't respond. Grace found me later that day, and she could tell something was up. I showed her the email, and she just shook her head, saying, "You don't owe them a response, you know." And she was right. I didn't. But there was this part of me that felt bad. Like somehow, by not answering, I was the one being difficult. It's weird how family guilt sticks with you, even when you know you're in the right. But I held firm. I didn't reply. I told myself that if they wanted a relationship with me, they'd have to acknowledge my feelings and actually try to understand where I was coming from. Until then, I wasn't going to keep bending over backward to make them feel better about their choices. It wasn't fair to me, and I was done compromising my mental health to keep the peace. Of course, my silence didn't go over well. A few days later, I get a call from my mom. I almost didn't pick up, but a small part of me hoped she might actually be reaching out to talk, not to lecture. Spoiler alert. I was wrong. She starts off calm, almost sweet, which threw me off because that's not her usual style when she's upset. But then, after a minute or two, she drops the act and launches into this whole speech about how I'm tearing the family apart and how my stubbornness is causing everyone stress. She kept saying, "We just want things to go back to how they were," as if that was a real solution. I told her, "Going back to how things were is exactly the problem. I don't want to keep pretending everything's fine while you and Dad keep acting like Liam is the only one who matters." I reminded her that I'd spent years dealing with this favoritism, and I was finally standing up for myself. And instead of understanding, they were making me out to be the villain. But she kept going on about how family isn't supposed to be fair, and how sometimes we just need to put our differences aside. She even threw in, "We're getting older, Alex. Do you really want things to be like this for the rest of our lives?" It was pure guilt tripping, and I could see exactly what she was doing, but it didn't make it any less effective. As much as I hated to admit it, her words got to me. I don't want things to be like this forever. But I also don't want to keep putting up with their crap just to make things look okay. So I told her, "If you want things to get better, then actually listen to what I'm saying. Acknowledge that you've hurt me and that the way you've treated Liam and me isn't fair. I'm not asking for miracles here, just a little accountability." But she shut that down fast, saying, "Oh, so we're supposed to apologize for helping your brother? That's ridiculous, Alex. You know we love you both equally." It was like talking to a wall. She didn't get it, and maybe she never would. So I said, "If you can't understand why this bothers me, Then maybe you don't actually know me as well as you think you do? She didn't take that well. She huffed, said something about me being dramatic, and then hung up. At that point, I was done. I'd given them every opportunity to understand my side, and every time, they'd twisted it back on me. Grace was right. I didn't owe them anything. If they wanted a relationship, they'd have to make an effort, but I wasn't going to chase after people who didn't respect me. It was that simple. Over the next couple of weeks, I just focused on my own life. Grace and I spent more time together, and I started investing energy into things that actually made me happy. We planned a few weekend trips, focused on our goals, and tried to just enjoy life without all the family drama hanging over us. It was honestly refreshing to feel like I could breathe again. But it wasn't completely over. My parents didn't like being ignored, and they were determined to make sure I came to my senses. Out of nowhere, they started calling Grace, sending her messages asking her to talk some sense into Alex. They kept telling her how much it was tearing them up inside that I wasn't speaking to them and how they missed having a close family. Grace, being the amazing person she is, shut that down right away. She told them that if they wanted to talk to me, they needed to approach me directly and actually listen to what I'd been saying, instead of trying to make her the middleman. She wasn't going to let them guilt her into fixing a situation they'd created. I couldn't have been prouder of her. After that, the call stopped. I think they finally realized that I wasn't going to budge and that Grace wasn't going to play their game either. It was quiet for a while, and I actually felt some peace for the first time in months. I knew they weren't happy with me, but honestly, I didn't care anymore. I was done bending over backward to keep a family bond that only seemed to matter when it was convenient for them. Looking back, it's crazy how long I put up with all of this, just because they're family. I'd been taught my whole life that family was everything, that no matter what, you stick together. But now, I was seeing things differently. Family might be important, sure, but it doesn't mean sacrificing your own happiness to keep the peace. It doesn't mean letting people walk all over you just because they're related to you. For the first time, I felt like I was actually standing up for myself, and it felt good. It wasn't easy, and there were definitely moments where I felt guilty, like I was doing something wrong. But Grace kept reminding me that this was about protecting my own well-being, not about making them happy. Now, as I sit here, I'm realizing just how much weight I've been carrying from this family mess. It feels lighter now, like a huge burden has been lifted. I don't know if my parents will ever really get it, but that's not my problem anymore. I've said my piece, and if they choose to ignore it, then that's on them. For now, I'm just focusing on the life I'm building with Grace. I thought things were finally settling down, but it turns out my family had other ideas. After weeks of silence, when I figured they'd finally backed off, I got hit with something I didn't see coming. I got a notice from my bank. My parents had somehow accessed an old joint account we'd used for some family expenses back when I was in college. I'd totally forgotten the account even existed, and apparently, so had the bank. The joint account was linked to my primary account, which meant they had easy access to a chunk of my savings. And of course, they'd helped themselves. I couldn't believe it. After everything I'd said, everything I'd laid out for them, they thought they could just dig into my account like it was their own. It was so unreal it almost felt like a bad joke. I spent a solid 10 minutes just staring at my account, trying to make sense of it. There was no mistake. It was a direct withdrawal. I didn't even know what they'd used the money for, but I had a sick feeling it wasn't anything essential. I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt, but it was hard, knowing their track record. Grace walked in as I was sitting there, and she knew immediately that something was wrong. I explained it to her, and she just shook her head. "You need to take this seriously, Alex," she said. "They're not respecting any boundaries. They're just doing whatever they want because they think they can." She was right, of course. I'd been letting them get away with things for way too long, always brushing it off or trying to keep the peace. But there was no peace here, just more manipulation. They'd clearly crossed a line, and I knew I had to finally put a stop to it. The next day, I called my bank, and they helped me take back control of my accounts, closing the joint one entirely. The woman on the phone was sympathetic, even threw in a little, "I'm so sorry you're dealing with this" at the end of our call, which honestly made me feel seen. Once my finances were secure, I took it a step further. I reached out to a lawyer to see what I could do. I didn't want to involve the law with my own family, but I couldn't ignore this anymore. I needed some way to protect myself. The lawyer, who was about my age and didn't give me any judgy vibes, laid it all out. She told me that technically what they did could be considered theft. I almost laughed at how ridiculous it sounded. Theft and my parents in the same sentence. But it was the reality. She suggested that I could file a claim to recover the money and even issue a formal warning to prevent them from doing anything like this again. The lawyer's calm professionalism helped ground me. It was all business to her, no drama, and for once, it felt like I had a solid plan. I decided to go through with it. I filed a claim to get my money back, and I had my lawyer draft a letter warning my parents to stay out of my finances. I didn't want this to escalate, but I also couldn't let them keep walking all over me. Grace supported my decision completely, and honestly, that made a huge difference. Having her in my corner kept me from backing down, kept me from letting that lingering guilt push me into just letting it go. About a week later, I got the money back from the bank, but it was far from over. My parents didn't take kindly to getting a legal letter from their ungrateful son, as they put it. My mom called, practically yelling into the phone, accusing me of betraying the family. She kept throwing around phrases like, "We're your parents, we raised you, and this is how you repay us." I stayed calm. I told her, "This isn't about repayment. This is about boundaries. You crossed a line, and I have to protect myself." She wouldn't hear it. She went on and on about how I was tearing the family apart and how all they wanted was to help me and my brother stay close. But I'd had enough. I told her, "If you really cared about our family, you'd listen to what I'm saying instead of trying to make me feel guilty for setting boundaries. You and Dad have never respected my independence, and I'm done letting it slide." I could tell she wasn't expecting me to stand my ground like that. There was this pause, and then she said, "Fine, if that's how you feel, maybe it's better if we don't talk for a while." And just like that, she hung up. I sat there, phone still in my hand, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. It's tough to describe. I was sad because deep down, I'd always wanted my parents to understand me, to see me as an adult who deserved their respect. But at the same time, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time, I wasn't backing down, wasn't compromising my own happiness for theirs. After that call, I decided to take some time away from them entirely. I didn't block their numbers or anything. I wasn't going for a dramatic cutoff. But I stopped reaching out, stopped answering their guilt-laden messages. For the first time, I felt free to focus on my own life, without their influence hanging over me. In the weeks that followed, I felt more at peace than I had in years. I poured my energy into my work, spent quality time with Grace, and focused on the things that genuinely made me happy. I even took up a few hobbies I'd been meaning to try, like cooking, which I'm admittedly terrible at. But hey, I'm learning. There were moments where I missed them, though. It's not easy to let go of family, no matter how much hurt they've caused. But every time I thought about reaching out, I reminded myself of all the times they'd ignored my feelings, crossed my boundaries, and tried to guilt-trip me into submission. I wasn't going back to that. I'd finally set a line they couldn't cross, and I was sticking to it. Grace has been my rock through all of this. She tells me she's proud of me for standing up for myself, and honestly, that means more than she probably knows. We're even talking about starting a family of our own soon, and it feels good knowing that I can break this cycle. My kids won't have to deal with the same kind of emotional manipulation I went through. As for my parents, I don't know what the future holds. Maybe one day they'll come around, maybe not. But for now, I'm okay with the distance. I'm okay with living my life on my terms, without constantly worrying about their judgment or approval. This whole experience taught me that family isn't just about who you're related to. It's about who genuinely respects you, who's willing to support you even when it's uncomfortable for them. Grace has shown me more love and support than my parents ever have, and that's the kind of family I want to build with her. Looking back, I realize I was holding on to the idea of what I wanted my parents to be, rather than accepting who they actually were. Letting go of that ideal was painful, but it was necessary. And now I feel more confident than ever. I'm finally living my life for me, not for anyone else's expectations. Thanks to everyone who's followed this journey and shared their advice along the way. Your support has meant more than I can put into words. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long time, I'm genuinely hopeful.
The sound of my father's raised voice stopped me cold outside his office door. In all my 19 years, I'd never heard him yell like that. Not even when I totaled his car last summer. "You had no right, Veronica. No right at all." I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering. The scholarship letter in my back pocket suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "I'm protecting this family," Veronica shot back, her voice dripping with that fake concern she'd perfected over the years. "Have you seen the cost of that program? It'll bankrupt us, Michael. And for what? So she can run off to chase some ridiculous dream." I'm Hazel, and this was the moment I realized my stepmother had been sabotaging my life for years. She earned that scholarship on her own merit. Dad said, his voice cracking. And you went behind our backs to try and get it revoked? Merit! Veronica laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Please, we both know she only got it because of that sob story about her dead mother. My fingers curled into fists. The acceptance letter crinkled. Don't you dare, Dad warned. Don't you dare bring Sarah into this. Why not? Everyone else does. Poor little Hazel lost her mother so young. It's all I ever hear about. But who's been here? Who's been raising her? Me. And this is how she repays me? By running off to that fancy art school across the country? I bit my lip until I tasted blood. 6 years of forced smiles, of yes, Veronica, and whatever you think is best, Veronica. 6 years of watching her slowly isolate my father, turn him against my dreams, piece by piece. The scholarship stays, Dad said firmly. And if I find out you've tried to interfere again? You'll what? Veronica's voice turned deadly quiet. Leave me. Go ahead. But remember who helped you rebuild your business after the recession. Remember whose connections saved this family from bankruptcy. You really want to throw all that away for her art school fantasy? The silence that followed felt like a knife in my chest. That's what I thought, Veronica continued. Now, I have a lovely dinner planned. We'll discuss this like a proper family. I'm sure Hazel will understand once we explain the financial reality. My phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn. Did you tell them about the scholarship yet? I typed back with shaking fingers. No. But V found out somehow. It's bad. Want me to come over? Before I could reply, footsteps approached the door. I scrambled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. Veronica emerged, perfectly composed as always. Her eyes widened in fake surprise. Hazel, darling, how long have you been home? Her smile never reached her eyes. It never did. Just got here, I lied, matching her fake warmth with my own. Is everything okay? I thought I heard voices. Oh, your father and I were just discussing your future. She reached out to touch my cheek. I forced myself not to flinch. Why don't you join us for dinner? We have so much to talk about. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of my father through the doorway. He sat at his desk, head in his hands, defeated. In that moment, something inside me hardened. 6 years of playing nice, of trying to keep the peace, of watching this woman slowly poison everything I loved. Actually, I said, stepping back from her reach, I have plans with Evelyn. School project, can't miss it. Family comes first, dear. Her fingers twitched just slightly. Cancel your plans. I met her gaze steadily. No, I said. I don't think I will. Something dark flashed across her face, just for a second, but I saw it. And I knew then that the war she'd been waging in secret was about to become very, very public. I turned and walked away, my mind already racing with plans. If Veronica wanted to play games, fine. But she was about to learn that some people play to win. Evelyn's basement had always been our sanctuary, but tonight it felt like a war room. I paced between the worn leather couch and the pool table, replaying the afternoon's confrontation while she watched me with growing concern. She actually tried to get your scholarship revoked. Evelyn's voice cracked with disbelief. That's next-level psycho, even for Veronica. I stopped pacing, fishing the crumpled acceptance letter from my pocket. Dad's signature is forged on this withdrawal request. Look at the date. 3 days ago. She must have gone through my room while I was at work. What are you going to do? The question hung in the air like smoke. Through the basement window, I caught glimpses of people walking past. Normal families heading home for normal dinners without wondering if their stepmother was plotting their downfall. Remember when she first moved in? I sank onto the couch. How she used to bring me those little art supplies. Watercolours, sketch pads, fancy pencils. Yeah, you were what? 13? 12! My laugh came out bitter. God, I actually thought she cared about my art. Turns out she was just marking her territory, making sure Dad saw her playing mommy. My phone buzzed. Dad again. 4th missed call. You should talk to him, Evelyn said softly. And say what? Hey, Dad. Sorry your wife's a manipulative snake who's been sabotaging me since middle school. Maybe he needs to hear exactly that. Before I could respond, footsteps thundered down the basement stairs. Derek burst in, still wearing his work uniform from the garage. "You okay? Got your text?" He crossed to the couch, pulling me close. The familiar smell of motor oil and cologne steadied my nerves. "I'm fine, just family drama." "Bullshit." He pulled back, studying my face. "You're shaking." Evelyn tossed him the forged withdrawal letter. His expression darkened as he read. "This is illegal," he said finally. "We should report her." "To who?" "The evil stepmother police." "The actual police. This is fraud." My phone buzzed again. This time a text from Veronica. "Your father is very disappointed in your behavior. Come home so we can discuss this as a family." I showed them the message. Evelyn swore under her breath. "Classic manipulation," she said, "making it sound like your dad's the one who's upset when she's the one pulling strings." "You can stay at my place," Derek offered. "My roommate's gone for the week." The offer was tempting, but running would only prove Veronica right, that I was too immature, too unstable for the scholarship program. My phone chimed again. This time it was Sophie, Veronica's best friend. "Hey, sweetie, heard about the scholarship situation. Let's grab coffee tomorrow, just us girls." "That's weird," Evelyn said, reading over my shoulder. "Since when does Sophie reach out to you directly?" "Since never." I forwarded the text to them both. "Think Veronica put her up to it?" "Obviously," Derek scoffed. "But maybe we can use that." Evelyn sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" "Sophie knows all Veronica's secrets, right? And lately, I've noticed tension between them at the country club." I turned to face him. "What kind of tension?" "The kind where Sophie drinks too much at ladies' brunch and starts venting about feeling used. Trust me, there's bad blood there." A plan started forming in my mind. So if someone were to encourage that tension... Exactly. Derek squeezed my hand. "Fight fire with fire." "It's risky," Evelyn warned. "If Veronica figures out you're turning her friends against her..." "What's she gonna do?" I stood up, suddenly energized. "Try to ruin my life?" "Too late." My phone buzzed one final time. "Dad, please come home, kiddo, we need to talk." I stared at the message, remembering his defeated posture in the office. How long had Veronica been manipulating him? How many other times had she sabotaged things behind our backs? "I'm going home," I announced, "but not to make peace." "Want backup?" Derek asked. I shook my head. "I need to handle this part alone, but tomorrow..." I looked at my friends, feeling a surge of gratitude for their loyalty. "Tomorrow we start planning." "Planning what?" Evelyn asked. I thought about all the little cruelties, all the subtle manipulations over the years. How Veronica had slowly poisoned everything good in our family while maintaining her perfect stepmother facade. "Planning how to make her mask slip," I said, in front of everyone. Sophie's coffee shop suggestion turned out to be the most expensive place in town. Of course it was. I watched her stir her third sugar packet into her latte, wondering how many of Veronica's secrets that perfectly glossed smile was hiding. "I've known your stepmother for 15 years, Sophie said, tapping her spoon against the rim. "She means well, even if her methods are unconventional." Unconventional? The word tasted like acid. "Is that what we're calling fraud now?" Sophie's smile flickered. "The scholarship withdrawal was extreme, I'll admit. But she's just trying to protect you from... From what? Success? Independence?" A group of women at the next table glanced over. Sophie lowered her voice. "From making the same mistakes she did. Did you know she went to art school too?" That stopped me cold. "What?" "Before she met your father. She was quite talented." Sophie's perfectly manicured nails drummed against her cup. "Then her first husband died, leaving her with nothing but student debt and unfinished paintings." My phone buzzed. "Derek, found something interesting in V's old social media. Call me." "What happened to her art?" I asked, buying time. "Life happened. Bills. Reality." Sophie leaned forward. "She doesn't want you struggling like she did. So instead of warning me, she forges documents and tries to sabotage my future." You don't understand how much she... You're right, I cut her off. I don't understand. Just like I don't understand why you're really here. Something shifted in Sophie's expression, a crack in her polished veneer. What do you mean? Veronica sent you to do damage control, but you're not telling me everything. She sat back, studying me with new interest. You're sharper than she gives you credit for, and you're not as loyal as she thinks you are. The words hung between us like smoke. Sophie's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her purse. Be careful, Hazel, she said quietly. Veronica doesn't handle betrayal well. Ask her sister. She doesn't have a sister. Sophie stood, dropping cash on the table. Exactly. My phone buzzed again as she walked away. This time it was Evelyn. Emergency. V's at the school board meeting right now. Ice shot through my veins. The scholarship committee meeting, the one where they finalized fall admissions. I ran out of the coffee shop, dialing Derek. He answered on the first ring. Found her old wedding announcement, he said without preamble. Before your dad. Get this, her first husband didn't die. He left her after she... Tell me later. I cut him off, already sprinting toward my car. She's at the school board. We need everything you found, now. On it. Meet you there. The drive to the administration building was a blur. I found Evelyn pacing outside, clutching a manila folder. She's telling them you cheated on your portfolio submission, she said, shoving the folder at me. But I got copies of all your original work submissions from Mrs. Chen. Every dated draft, every progress photo. My hands shook as I flipped through the evidence. 6 years of work. 6 years of dreams she was trying to destroy. How long has she been in there? 20 minutes. They're in the main conference room. I started toward the door, but Evelyn caught my arm. Wait, she said. There's more. Sophie called me right after you met. Said to check Veronica's history with the Sterling Art Institute. That's where she went to school. Where she taught. Until she was fired for selling student work as her own. The pieces clicked together like a terrible puzzle. Her obsession with my art supplies. The way she'd hover when I worked. All those suggestions about signing my pieces differently. She wasn't preparing to be a supportive stepmother, I whispered. She was marking her territory, making sure everyone knew she was the real artist in the family. Hazel. Evelyn's voice was urgent. If she convinces them you cheated. She won't. I pushed through the building's doors, clutching my evidence folder like a shield. Behind me, I heard Derek's car screech into the parking lot. Ahead, voices drifted from the conference room, including Veronica's, smooth as honey, and twice as toxic. I hate to bring this to your attention, but as someone who deeply values artistic integrity, I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders. Time to show her what real artistic integrity looked like. Ready? Evelyn whispered beside me. I thought of Sophie's warning about betrayal, about Veronica's mysterious sister, about all the lives she'd poisoned before mine. Ready, I said, and pushed open the conference room door. The Sterling Art Institute's records arrived in a plain manila envelope, but the contents hit like a bomb. I spread the documents across Derek's kitchen table while Evelyn paced behind me. Terminated for ethical violations, I read aloud. Multiple incidents of unauthorized use of student work. Keep reading, Derek said, pointing to the next paragraph. Following investigation, Professor Veronica Mitchell agreed to resign quietly in exchange for... My voice caught. In exchange for destroying all evidence of student complaints. Evelyn stopped pacing. She didn't just steal their work, she erased their voices. My phone lit up with Dad's message. Coming home tonight. We need to talk about what happened at the school board. The school board meeting had been a disaster. Not because I'd failed to defend myself, but because Veronica had turned it into exactly what she wanted. A public spectacle of concern for her troubled stepdaughter. I should have seen it coming, I said, shuffling through more documents. The way she cried in front of the committee, talking about how worried she was about my unstable behavior and concerning patterns. She's good, Derek admitted. Making herself look like the victim while destroying you? That's next-level manipulation. Another document caught my eye. A newspaper clipping from 15 years ago. Local artist wins regional prize. The photo showed a younger Veronica beside a hauntingly familiar painting. "That's your style," Evelyn whispered. "The way you layer colours, the composition." "No," I corrected her, hands shaking. "That's my mother's style." The room went silent. I pulled up a photo on my phone, one of my mum's last paintings before she died. The similarities were undeniable. "She didn't just want to stop me from going to art school," I said slowly. "She wanted to erase every trace of my mother's influence. That's why she pushed me toward different techniques all these years." Derek's phone buzzed. "Sophie wants to meet. Says she has something we need to see." "It's a trap," Evelyn warned. "Maybe," I said, still staring at the painting. "But we need more proof." "You have proof," Evelyn gestured at the documents. "Take this to your dad. Show him what she really is." I thought about Dad's message, about the way he looked at Veronica even now, like she was his salvation after Mom died. The truth would destroy him. "There's something else," Derek said quietly. "Something Sophie mentioned about Veronica's sister. The one who supposedly doesn't exist." He pulled up an old social media post. "Meet Christina Mitchell, Veronica's younger sister, also an artist." The photo showed two women, arms linked, smiling at a gallery opening. The caption read, "Sisters sharing their passion for art." "What happened to her?" Evelyn asked. "That's the thing," Derek scrolled through more posts. "She just disappears. No death notice, no explanation. Just gone, right after Veronica started teaching at Sterling." My phone buzzed again. Veronica this time. "Your father's very disappointed. But we can fix this if you're willing to be honest about your issues." The pieces clicked together like a terrible puzzle. Christina's disappearance, the stolen artwork, the systematic destruction of anyone who threatened Veronica's artistic identity. She's not going to stop, I realized. The school board was just the beginning. She'll keep going until she's destroyed everything I am. "So what do we do?" Evelyn asked. I looked at the documents spread across the table, at my mother's artistic legacy that Veronica had tried to erase, at the evidence of lives she'd ruined before mine. "We find Christina," I said, "and we make Veronica face every person she's ever silenced." "That's dangerous," Derek warned. "If she did something to her own sister, then I need to know what I'm really dealing with." I started gathering the documents, because this isn't just about my future anymore. It's about making sure she never does this to anyone else. My phone lit up one last time. "Sophie, meeting tonight. Come alone. There's something you need to know about Christina." I showed them the message. "Don't go," they said in unison. But we all knew I would. Because sometimes the only way to fight a monster is to walk straight into their lair. I just hoped I was ready for whatever truth waited there. Sophie's hands trembled as she slid the envelope across the diner table. Outside, rain pelted the windows, turning the parking lot lights into blurry halos. The late-night crowd had thinned to a few truckers and an elderly couple sharing pie. "Christina's alive," Sophie said quietly, "but Veronica made sure she'll never paint again." I stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it. What did she do? It's not what she did. It's what she threatened to do. Sophie glanced over her shoulder. Christina had evidence, proof that Veronica had been stealing student work for years, but she also had a young daughter. My phone buzzed. "Derek, V just left your house, heading your way, get out now." I ignored it. Where is Christina now? Working at a hardware store in Oregon? Living under her married name? Sophie's mascara was smudged beneath her eyes. She gave up everything, her art, her identity, her whole life, to protect her daughter from Veronica's revenge. The envelope felt heavy as I picked it up. Inside were photos, Christina's gallery openings, her reviews in art magazines, her rising star suddenly snuffed out. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because Veronica's doing it again. She's already contacted the dean at your art school, planted seeds about your instability. She's building a case just like she did with Christina." My phone lit up again. Evelyn this time. "Your dad found the Sterling documents. He's furious. Call him. What exactly did she do to Christina's daughter? I asked. Sophie's voice dropped to a whisper. She arranged accidents, small ones at first, a fall at school, food poisoning, a bike crash. Nothing fatal, just enough to send a message. The elderly couple paid their bill and left. Rain drummed harder against the windows. And now she's targeting me. No, Sophie leaned forward. She's targeting everyone you love. Derek's garage. The health inspection wasn't random. Your friend Evelyn's college recommendation being rescinded. Not a clerical error. My hands clenched into fists. Why are you telling me this? You're her friend. I was Christina's friend first. Sophie's eyes hardened. And I've spent 15 years watching Veronica destroy people. It has to stop. The diner's bell chimed. Through the rain-streaked windows, I saw a familiar car pull into the lot. She's here, Sophie whispered. Remember what I said about Christina. There are worse things than giving up your dreams. I stood, shoving the envelope into my bag. I'm not Christina. No, Sophie's smile was sad. You're worse. You're Sarah's daughter. And that's why she'll never stop until she's erased every trace of your mother's talent from your work. The diner's door opened. I heard the click of expensive heels on linoleum. Hazel, darling. Veronica's voice dripped honey. What a surprise running into you here. I turned slowly. She stood there in her perfect clothes, perfect makeup, perfect smile. But now I saw the cracks, the slight tremor in her hand, the tightness around her eyes. Sophie and I were just discussing art, I said, specifically the Sterling Art Institute's faculty records. The smile flickered. Oh? How fascinating. Sophie, I didn't realize you and my stepdaughter had become so close. We were actually talking about Christina, I pressed. Your sister? The one who disappeared? Veronica's mask slipped for just a second, long enough to see something dark and hungry beneath. Sophie, dear, I think it's time you headed home. Sophie stood, gathering her purse. As she passed me, she whispered, Choose carefully. Some victories cost more than defeat. I watched her hurry out into the rain, leaving me alone with the monster who'd married my father. Shall we discuss this at home? Veronica gestured to the door. Your father's quite concerned about your recent behavior. I thought about Christina, living in exile to protect her child, about my mother's artistic legacy, slowly being erased, about Derek's garage and Evelyn's future. No, I said quietly. I think we should discuss it right here. All of it. Unless you'd prefer the police handle the investigation into Christina's disappearance. Veronica's smile turned razor-sharp. Oh, sweetheart, you really are your mother's daughter. She slid into the booth across from me. Let's talk about what happens to people who threaten my family. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing away any chance of escape. The police station's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Dad's face as he stared at the photos spread before him. Christina's evidence, the Sterling Institute documents, everything I'd gathered to expose Veronica. She says you've been stalking her sister, he said quietly, that you've become obsessed. Dad, the restraining order is temporary. His voice cracked. But Hazel, they found those threatening emails on your laptop. My blood ran cold. What emails? To Christina, to Sophie. He pushed a printout across the table. To Veronica's old students, all sent from your account. The words blurred before my eyes. Emails I'd never written, threatening violence against everyone who'd wronged me, all perfectly crafted to make me sound unhinged. She planted them, I whispered. She must have accessed my computer when... Stop. Dad pressed his hands against his temples. Just... stop. The doctors think... Doctors? The interview room door opened. Veronica glided in, followed by a man in a white coat. Her eyes were red-rimmed, perfectly portraying the concerned stepmother. Dr. Reynolds specializes in acute psychiatric episodes, she said softly. He's agreed to help us understand what's happening. The doctor sat down, opening a file. Your father and stepmother have described some concerning behaviors, Hazel. Paranoid delusions, Conspiracy theories, escalating aggression. "This isn't real," I laughed, the sound sharp and desperate. "Dad, you can't believe—" "We found your mother's paintings," Veronica interrupted. "The ones you've been copying, claiming they're your original work, adding dates to make it look like I stole from you when really—" My phone buzzed in my pocket. Derek. But before I could reach for it, Veronica continued. "And poor Sophie. Having to file a restraining order against you after you threatened her daughter." "What?" I turned to Dad. "That's not—" "The emails were quite graphic," the doctor said, "describing how you'd make her pay for betraying you." Another buzz. Evelyn this time. But the officer by the door stepped closer, watching my movements. "We just want to help." Veronica reached for my hand. I jerked away. "A short stay at the treatment center, some medication to stabilize your mood." "Dad," I pleaded, "look at me. You know me." He wouldn't meet my eyes. I thought I did. My phone buzzed a third time. The officer frowned. "Phone, please," he said. "Protocol for psychiatric holds." The world tilted sideways. This was her endgame. Not just destroying my future, but my credibility, my sanity, everything I could use against her. "Christina," I said desperately. "Call Christina, she'll tell you." "Your obsession with my sister has to stop." Veronica's voice hardened. "She's dead, Hazel. She died 15 years ago. I showed you the death certificate, but she hadn't. That was the mistake. The single thread that could unravel everything." "No," I said slowly. "You didn't." Something flickered in her eyes. Fear. My phone buzzed one final time. A text preview lit up the screen before the officer could grab it. "Found Christina. She's alive. Video proof. Holding for—" The phone went dark in the officer's hand. But I'd seen enough. Veronica had too, judging by the way her perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms. "I think," the doctor said, "given the severity of the delusions, immediate intervention would be best." Two orderlies appeared in the doorway. Dad stood, finally looking at me with tears in his eyes. "It's just for a few days," he said, "until you're thinking clearly again." I looked at Veronica, at her mask of concern hiding the triumph beneath. She'd orchestrated everything perfectly. The evidence against her would be dismissed as the ravings of a mentally ill teenager. My father would sign whatever papers she put in front of him, and I'd disappear into a system designed to make people doubt their own reality. Just like Christina had disappeared, just like all the others who'd threatened Veronica's carefully constructed world. The orderlies stepped forward with a wheelchair. "Standard protocol," they said, "for my own safety." But as they reached for me, I remembered Sophie's words. Some victories cost more than defeat. I had to choose, fight now and prove Veronica right about my instability, or submit and pray Derek's message meant what I thought it did. "Okay," I whispered, sinking into the wheelchair. "You win." Veronica's smile was radiant with false compassion. But she didn't see me slip the police interview room recording device into my sock, the one that had captured every word of her careful manipulation. Sometimes surrender is just another way to fight. The treatment center's visiting rooms smelled like artificial lemons and despair. 3 days of observation had taught me the camera's blind spots, the staff's rotation schedule, and exactly how long I had before someone noticed the recording device missing from my sock. Christina sat across from me, her hands trembling around her paper coffee cup. She looked nothing like the vibrant artist in those old photos. Her hair was grey now, her eyes haunted. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. "If Veronica finds out—" "She already knows." I slid my phone across the table, showing her the security footage Derek had captured. "You've been watching me for weeks, haven't you? Ever since Sophie reached out?" She nodded, tears welling. "I had to make sure you weren't like her, that helping you wouldn't put my daughter at risk again." The door opened. Veronica swept in, perfectly coiffed even at this early hour. Her smile froze when she saw Christina. "Well," she said softly, "the prodigal sister returns." "Hello, Veronica. Here to fuel more of Hazel's delusions?" Veronica sat beside me, maternal concern radiating from every pore. The doctors say she's been making excellent progress. We wouldn't want to trigger another episode. I pressed play on the hidden recorder. Veronica's own voice filled the room. Your obsession with my sister has to stop. She's dead, Hazel. She died 15 years ago. Christina's hands stopped shaking. I'm very much alive, sister dear. And I brought proof of everything you did. Every painting you stole, every student you threatened, every accident that befell my daughter until I agreed to disappear. Careful, Veronica's voice turned silky. False accusations can be so damaging to one's credibility. Just ask Hazel about her recent psychiatric evaluation. That's why I'm not the one making the accusations. The door opened again. Dad walked in, followed by Detective Martinez and Sophie. My father's face was ashen as he held up a USB drive. The emails, he said. The ones you claimed Hazel sent. The IP address traces back to our home computer, during hours when Hazel was documented at work. Michael, don't, his voice cracked. Just don't. Detective Martinez stepped forward. We have a warrant to search your devices, Mrs. Mitchell, and statements from multiple former Sterling Institute students. Veronica's mask cracked, just for a second. Then she laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You ungrateful little snake, she hissed at me. I gave you everything, a mother's love, guidance, protection. You gave me chains, I said quietly. Just like you gave Christina, like you gave all of them. I made them better artists. You stole their work, Christina's voice hardened, their dreams, their futures. I improved them, added my expertise, my vision. Added, Dad interrupted, or stole, like you stole my daughter's college fund. The money I thought was going to her tuition. Veronica stood backing toward the door, but Sophie blocked her path. It's over, Sophie said. No more manipulation, no more threats. You're all conspiring against me. Veronica's perfectly manicured hands clawed at her throat. I won't let you destroy everything I've built. I won't... She lunged for my phone, probably hoping to destroy the evidence, but her designer heel caught on the industrial carpet. She stumbled, catching herself against the wall, right beside my latest painting, the one I'd done in my mother's style, the one the doctors had allowed as art therapy. Veronica stared at it, something breaking in her expression. You'll never be her, she whispered. You'll never be Sarah. No matter how perfectly you copy her technique. I'm not trying to be her, I said. I'm being myself. That's what terrifies you, isn't it? That I might succeed where you failed? The detective stepped forward with handcuffs. Veronica didn't resist, her eyes fixed on the painting. You think this is victory? She asked softly. You think exposing me will heal what's broken inside you? No, I stood, gathering my evidence. But it will stop you from breaking anyone else. As they led her away, I caught Christina's eye. She nodded once, understanding passing between us. Some victories don't feel like winning. Some battles leave scars even after justice is served. But watching Veronica's perfect facade finally shatter completely, that felt like freedom. Dad wrapped his arm around my shoulders as we walked out, leaving the artificial lemon smell and the ghost of Veronica's control behind us. Sometimes the greatest act of revenge is simply refusing to become what your monster wanted you to be. The gallery lights cast soft shadows across my mother's paintings. The real ones this time, rescued from Veronica's storage unit, along with dozens of other stolen works. Christina stood beside me, both of us reflected in the glass protecting Summer Storm, Mum's last completed piece. She never could capture light quite like Sarah did, Christina said quietly. That's what drove her mad, you know. Not just the stealing, but the knowing. That she'd never be as genuine as the artists she destroyed. The exhibition, Reclaimed Voices, the Sterling Institute Recovery Project, had drawn hundreds. Former students, art critics, collectors, all here to reclaim what Veronica had stolen, to restore names to unsigned works, to heal old wounds. Dad appeared beside us, his tie slightly crooked. The detective wants to know if you'll testify at the sentencing hearing. I watched a young artist across the room discover her lost portfolio, tears streaming down her face as she traced her signature under Veronica's painted-over name. No, let the others tell their stories. I have something different in mind. Sophie approached, carrying a newspaper. The headline read, "Former art professor pleads guilty to fraud, theft of student works." "She's asking to see you," Sophie said, "claims she has something to say before they transfer her." She always has something to say. I turned away from Mum's painting. But I have work to do. That work waited in my studio. Not the basement room where Veronica had tried to shape me in her image, but a sun-filled space overlooking the city. My easel held a half-finished piece, nothing like Mum's style or Veronica's stolen techniques. Something entirely new. Derek found me there later, as sunset painted the windows gold. "The exhibition's a success. They're already talking about touring it nationally." Good. I added another layer of paint, watching the colours blend. They deserve to have their work seen. Their real work. Under their real names. "And what about your work?" He gestured to the canvas. "This is different from anything you've done before." "Because it's finally mine." I stepped back, studying the emerging image. Not what Mum would have painted. Not what Veronica tried to force me to be. Just me. Evelyn burst in, waving her phone. "You need to see this now." The screen showed security footage from the county jail. Veronica sat in her cell, methodically tearing pages from a sketchbook. Each sheet contained perfect copies of other artists' works, as if she couldn't create anything else even now. "She's still doing it," Evelyn whispered, "still trying to steal other people's light." "No." I set down my brush. "She's showing us who she always was. A reflection without a source. A mirror with nothing of her own to show." Dad called that evening, his voice tired but clear. "The divorce papers are filed, and I found something you should see." In his study, he opened Mum's old journal. A letter fell out, dated just before she died. "To my daughter, the artist who will paint her own sky." My hands shook as I read her words. "Don't let anyone tell you which colours to use or which stories to tell. Your art, like your heart, belongs only to you." I thought of Veronica in her cell, endlessly copying others' work. Of Christina, finally free to paint again. Of all the artists reclaiming their stolen voices. "I'm not going to testify," I told Dad, "but I am going to paint her portrait. One last piece showing exactly who she is." "Are you sure that's wise?" I looked at my latest work, at the unique style emerging from the canvas. She tried to make me choose between being Mom and being her. But there was always a third option, being myself. The portrait would show Veronica surrounded by mirrors, each reflecting someone else's art, her own face blank and empty at the centre. A warning, perhaps, or maybe just the truth she never could face. "Sometimes," Christina had said at the gallery, "the best revenge is simply creating something your monster could never copy." I picked up my brush again as night fell, ready to paint my own sky. Behind me, Mom's journal lay open to her final words. "The greatest masterpiece you'll ever create is the artist you become." Veronica had tried to steal that future, but in the end, she'd only helped me find it.